Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for What's on Board briefing. My name is Gina Anderson, and I'm from NASA's Office of Communications. Today we'll be discussing the science launching aboard Northrop Grumman's 11th Commercial Resupply Services mission to the International Space Station on tomorrow, Wednesday, April 17th. The Cygnus spacecraft will carry about 7,600 pounds of research, supplies, and hardware, and we're going to highlight a few of the science investigations and technology projects during our broadcast today. The International Space Station is one of the most unique environments in which scientists can conduct research. What we learn from these investigations will help us learn how humans will live, travel, and work in space as we prepare ourselves to explore the moon, Mars, and beyond. The knowledge being generated is also leading to technological advancements and other benefits back on our home planet. First, we'll hear from representatives about an overview of the science for this launch from the International Space Station Program Office and the International Space Station U.S. National Lab. Following this brief introduction, I will introduce each speaker for a discussion on their research, technology, or science instrument, and then open up the floor for Q&A. Reporters dialed in may ask questions as well. We'll also be taking questions via social media using the hashtag AskNASA. First, we'll hear from Pete Hasbrook, the manager of the International Space Station Program Science Office at NASA's Johnson Space Center. Pete, welcome.
Thank you very much, Gina. Can you all hear me in the room okay here? Yeah. Okay, good. It is really neat to see so many of you here in person. It's a full house for those watching on the web, and we thank everybody who's watching on the web too. We are really excited for this launch tomorrow. The Cygnus is a great vehicle for us in the space station science program. It brings a lot of cargo for us. Traditionally, it's brought pressurized cargo. More and more, though, it's bringing external cargo, which is a really cool thing. But one of the best things about this mission is the new capabilities that Cygnus has, and Northrop Grumman is providing this time, a very late load for our scientific cargo. That's really important to us in the science world. A lot of our samples are biological in nature, so they need to be kept alive, need to be kept at good temperatures, conditioned well. We need data on them as they're in the vehicle before launch and launching and on their way to station. And Northrop Grumman has provided all that this time. You'll see a speaker after me describing how the launch crew, and probably right now as we're speaking, is opening up the pop top on the nose cone and putting in the biological samples that we're going to use later on station. Not just biological samples, a lot of times our physical sciences need conditioned stowage or they need power, otherwise you lose the phenomenon that you're trying to study. Overall on the space station is a multidisciplinary lab in space. It's a world-class facility. And unlike a lot of labs on the ground, which focus on one discipline of science and maybe very narrowly on a subdiscipline, we have many different categories of research that we do on station. So it's open for many reasons, many users. We do biology and biotechnology. We do earth sciences and space sciences, human research, physical sciences, technology demonstration and development, and finally global education. At any one time, we've got close to 300 different investigations going on, too many to really keep track reliably of, although we have people that work really hard on that. Another reason that it's hard to say how many exactly is because we are bringing things through the flow so fast now that things pop up, and before 6 months is out, they'll be conceived, up on the station, and waiting for their operations. This Cygnus vehicle that's launching tomorrow is launching science cargo to support over 40 different investigations. Most of those are going up on the Cygnus in one form or another, but we're also launching cargo that supports ongoing investigations as well. All of this is advancing our knowledge for those of us on the ground as well as future exploration. We have a lot of work going on the space station right now. Back in March, we launched a Soyuz rocket, which brought 3 crew to the station, bringing us back to our normal 6. But most importantly for the science world, it brought us to 4 USOS, or U.S. Operating Segment crew members. And when we go to 4 like that, it essentially doubles the amount of crew time that we're able to devote to science. We have everything booked and planned for 3 crew members, and so everything is covered. All the systems work, all the medical work. You get a new 4th crew member up there, and it doubles the amount of time that we can devote to the science. So we've had a lot of stuff coming through the pipeline. It's challenging to keep up with that work. And the message out there is, if you're a scientist, now is a good time to get in the queue, because we have the capability and we want to get you on board to work with us. Also going on in the station world, not necessarily on board, our space station program and our partnership just put out a book called The Benefits for Humanity, and this is the 3rd edition. Hopefully you've seen The Benefits for Humanity in the past, but it's over 100 stories about the research that we've done on the station and how that benefits lives back here on Earth. This is the 3rd edition. The 2nd edition was about 4 years ago. Some of the new work that we've done in this edition is kind of going out on a limb of looking at the commercial benefits of the research and utilization that we're doing on station. For example, let's look at an industry, let's say CubeSats. CubeSats just developed in the last decade or so, and companies have recognized that demand and are launching CubeSats to be deployed from the station. You can look at the commercial valuation of those companies and get an idea of how much that market has grown. You could also look at human health and health care. If you are testing drugs, for example, and you develop a new drug that will prolong someone's life or ease their life and require less caregiving, that feeds back into an economy as well. People live longer, work longer, caregivers can do a day job instead of being a caregiver. So we kind of went out on that limb. There's lots of different ways to peel that orange, but we took a shot, and I hope you appreciate what we did. The other thing we did is look at the science value of the research that we're doing. How are we contributing to science around the world, not just individual research disciplines, but where is that science carrying over into other disciplines? One of the examples I like to use is biophysics. You know, if you're doing biology and you start working at the small level, you start to care about how things like fluids flow through your analysis. Well, the physical scientists who study that kind of flow can help out. And so that's kind of a mashup of the science there that we're seeing more advantages from. Another big activity for us in the space station world is the twins study. Everybody probably remembers we did a 1-year mission that concluded about 3 years ago. We had Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko living for 11 months on the station. Most people also know that Scott Kelly has a twin brother, Mark. And so we took advantage of that and did a very detailed analysis. There were 10 different investigations that looked at both Scott and Mark during those 11 months, not just during the 11 months that Scott flew, but also the 6 to 8 months before he flew to collect baseline data. What is Scott really like? Collect a lot of detailed data during his flight and collect it on Mark at the same time to see if they diverged and where and how. And then for 6 or 8 months after Scott got back, continue that data collection and see how Scott came back to, let's say, normal. And some of the highlights out of that, most of the good news is that everything that changed, almost everything that changed during Scott's flight returned to normal after his flight. So there was very little lasting or residual effect after the last 6-month baseline. Some of the main things that we did see, something called telomeres, which are the little ends of your chromosomes. They're a protective end. As we age, as our cells divide, those chromosome ends, the telomeres, get shorter. And stress can contribute to that. And everybody thought, we know that space is a stressful environment. We expected those telomeres to be shorter. But actually, Scott's got longer while he was in space. They were longer for a couple of days after he returned to land, or to Kazakhstan and to Houston, and then they returned to normal. Another area that worked well is the immune system functioned as we thought it would. They gave Scott an inoculation, a vaccine before launch. You may have seen the pictures. He gave it to the same vaccine to himself middle of the flight, so a year later. And then again, a year after that, after he had landed. The immune system, the body's immune system, responded just like we would expect it to. So the vaccine worked as it should, and comparing that to Mark, it was remarkably consistent. And finally, one of the biggest things is all the genetic studies. We used the most modern equipment that we could. We designed the studies so that the analysis gave us the latest data. And now we know what kind of genes to look for that might change during a long space flight and reflect stress. We looked at those for both Scott and Mark. Again, most of those returned to normal for Scott after a couple of months after his landing. But now we have some idea of what to analyze, what to focus on. So all that said, there's a lot going on the station. We are doing some great work. We're really pleased, and we're pleased with you all with the interest as well as we move forward and expand our exploration opportunities and bring back benefits to those of us on Earth. I'd like to conclude my little part here. We do have a short video that we've prepared that is introducing the topics for this NG-11 CRS-11 launch. We'd like to roll that if we could, please. Okay, really cool stuff coming up. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague here from the U.S. National Laboratory and have Dr. Liz Warren tell you about the U.S. National Lab science.
Well, thank you, Pete. I want to echo you and tell you how excited I am. We are to be here at Wallops Flight Facility for the launch of NG-11. This is a really exciting time in space. It's a really exciting time for the International Space Station. And as a national lab, the space station is open to a variety of users. Academics, small businesses, small innovative startups, Fortune 500 companies all over the industry, as well as other government agencies such as the NIH and the NSF. The researchers you are going to hear from today have been working really hard to get their research ready to go to space. And it's exciting for me to see them here kind of at the conclusion of a lot of work. So this is a really special time for them. They seek to leverage those unique aspects of our low Earth orbit laboratory, microgravity, an extreme environment outside the space station, and also a vantage point with which to study the Earth and with which to study space. While NASA's research interests largely focus on exploring space and extending either materials or people or technologies for exploring space, the ISS National Laboratory focuses on using the space station to benefit life on Earth. That said, there are about a dozen national lab payloads aboard Cygnus today, ready for launch tomorrow. And they span the diversity of research that is sponsored by the ISS National Lab. As Pete mentioned, that includes biology and biotechnology. A small company called Aphios Corporation is interested in nanoparticle formulation and behavior. To that end, they want to understand how nanoparticles behave toward the manufacture, eventually, of things called nanosomes. They are small cell-like structures that encapsulate drugs or pharmaceuticals for precision delivery within the body. There's also an experiment from Alpha Space. Actually, it's many experiments. Alpha Space has a facility outside the space station where dozens or hundreds of materials can be placed outside in the extreme environment outside. From CubeSats, there are a number of CubeSats from different deployers. There will be the NanoRacks CubeSat deployer and CEOPS. One of those nanosats, or actually one of the CubeSats, is designed to test a new type of technology for studying weather. So again, looking at our own planet from Earth. There's also a variety of student investigations. As Pete mentioned, inspiring the next generation of scientists and technologists and explorers and engineers is really important to us. One area that is beginning to rise in interest and in demand is in-orbit manufacturing. We have 2 examples launching tomorrow, which seek to manufacture very high quality optical fiber, or ZBLAN. Manufacture in space, again, for the eventual reaching a market that affects consumers. The last thing I want to add is to learn more about any of these investigations, or all of the National Lab investigations, you can go to issnationallab.org. And tomorrow, when we're out there cheering on the launch, it's very common out here at Wallops to say, go Cygnus and go Antares. I say, go science too. And Gina, back to you.
Thanks, Pete and Liz. Do we have any questions for the team in the room?
I'm very interested in that.
Please wait for your mic. Thank you.
Speaking to this, I'm really interested in the CubeSat that you mentioned just now that measures the weather, the science of weather, because I'm a meteorologist myself, so I'm kind of interested to see, you don't have to give me the full detail of what it's about, but what is that CubeSat going to be measuring?
So it's testing a microwave technology for assessing weather. I don't actually have many more details than that. I would encourage you to go to our website, or I can follow up with you afterwards.
Any other questions?
I'm just curious as to the rodents experiment that you guys are doing. What are some of the things that you hope to get out of that?
We actually have speakers coming after us that are going to talk specifically about that.
Awesome, thank you.
So thanks for an easy question.
Do we have any questions from social media? #AskNASA. Okay. Any other questions in the room? Okay.
It's Jim. I'm with Falcon Press. Can you all speak to the Astrobee experiment and with regards to maneuverability in space using fans if there's no air in space? How is this?
You all are really good straight people with your questions. We also have an Astrobee speaker coming up after this.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Martha Franco with the Woodstock Times. I have interviewed both Scott and Mark for different reasons, and Mark said he thought that there would be less wear and tear on him than Scott thought there would be on Mark. And it proved that he was right? That his body really reacted well to space. I'm interested in what you said about there being less stress than you had imagined.
I need to be careful of how I said that. We know space is a stressful environment. We know that from like oxidation of blood and the radiation environment. The indicator that they were looking at is the telomere at the end of the DNA strand. Typically those get shorter based on stress, but Scott's got longer, and they don't understand what the reason is. But that's really interesting, that instead of his telomeres, if you will, getting older, it seemed that they got longer, which implies that they got more healthy. So there's more research required.
Thank you, Pete and Liz.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we'll hear from our speakers. As I mentioned earlier, each speaker will provide brief remarks, and then I'll call on reporters in the room and on the phone for questions, and then we'll ask questions from #AskNASA. Next, we are going to hear from Andrew Zarechnik, the Cygnus Vehicle Manager for Northrop Grumman, who will discuss the science capabilities of Cygnus. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey everybody, how's it going? So yeah, I'm the vehicle manager on the Cygnus program, and going to talk to you a little bit about Cygnus here, about the spacecraft that's used to deliver science. that Pete talked about and that you're going to hear more details about from the scientists. So the spacecraft itself here is Cygnus. The SS Roger Chaffee is what we named it for this mission, NG-11. We always name our missions after space pioneers, aeronautical pioneers, and there's Roger Chaffee. He's the guy that we named it after this time. So the NG-11 mission is the last mission of the CRS-1 program. It's the 11th in line. We're getting ready to start CRS-2, but this is the last of the CRS-1. So we've got some exciting new capabilities on this mission that I'll tell you about. So I'll describe a little bit of the mission, and I'll tell you about some of the new capabilities in the vehicle. So the vehicle is comprised of two parts. The top part is the pressurized cargo module. If you can maybe zoom out so the folks on TV. So up here is the PCM, pressurized cargo module, and down below is the service module. The majority of the experiments that are put on station are put inside the PCM. Those are all the pressurized module. That's what the astronauts then pull out of the PCM. But we also can do external experiments. So we can put items on the outside of the service module. We do have on this mission a CMG, that we're control moment gyro, that we are going to experiment with on this mission. And we also have a NanoRack deployer that pops out these CubeSats that you heard about on this mission. We do that each mission. So the way the mission works, tomorrow, we launch today. We are getting ready to load final cargo load the day before launch. Today's the day before launch. In about a couple hours, we'll be opening up the pop top of the fairing. I'll show you a couple pictures in a minute. Actually, why don't we go ahead and look at the first picture there. We did a demonstration to show this new capability just this last summer. And during the demonstration, what we do is we use real hardware, we use the real fairing, and we use simulators for some of it. The pressurized cargo module had a simulator, so we went to the launch pad, took the rocket up vertical, just like it is right now. As soon as they're done with their system test, they come down. And you see on the left there is the MPPF, the Mobile Payload Platform facility for loading cargo into the vehicle. So that Antares rocket will go horizontal, and we will send both cargo and people into the MPPF. We will take the pop top off the top of the fairing. If you go to the next picture, you see this is now, go to the next picture. That was not part of our, okay, so Antares is now horizontal. We got the MPPF there in the middle, and then a cargo transfer vehicle on the left. A little bit like at the airport, you see the food trucks coming up to the airplane here. We're coming up to the MPPF and loading cargo. So on this mission, there are 6 bags that we will put on at the last minute, 24 hours prior to launch, here through this facility. So go to the next slide. You can see inside the MPPF. This is the very top of the fairing, the nose cone, or we call it the pop top. And so they're taking off that pop top off the Antares launch vehicle. Next slide, you'll see it coming off there. And then next slide. So this is going to happen here in just a couple hours, real time. And our team, then the Cygnus team, will go into the MPPF and walk inside and open up the hatch from the top of the PCM. What you see there is looking inside through the fairing to the pressurized cargo module. So we take off the hatch, open up the hatch, and we can now load cargo into the vehicle. Very late in the flow, for the first time on NG-11 mission, we're doing this at the launch pad the day before launch. So that's an exciting new capability that allows us to do more science on this vehicle and allow more types of science to get to the station, such as the rodents. You're going to hear about those a little bit later. So it's exciting for us to have that new capability. So the plan for launch, once we load the cargo in, we'll close up the hatch, check the seals, put the pop top back on, and launch tomorrow at 4:46 p.m. Takes us a couple days to ascend to the space station. Space station arm will then grab us. Down here by the bottom, you see a little grapple fixture there, and the station grabs us there and bursts us to the station. We'll open back up that PCM hatch, and the astronauts then pull the experiments and cargo out of the vehicle and start doing their work with all of the great supplies that we've loaded into the PCM. We then stay on orbit for about 90 days while that's happening, and during that time, all of the good cargo is taken off the PCM, and they then load us with trash. There's a lot, of course, on station. You got to get rid of all that trash. They eat and they create trash just like we do on the ground. You got to get rid of it. And so that's an important capability that the Cygnus vehicle provides, is to dispose of all that trash while we're on orbit. Another new capability that we are starting with this mission is after we leave the station, a couple months, we are going to remain on orbit for several months, up to a year. And so this new capability allows us to to fly on station and provides another science facility for scientists to do experiments in a microgravity environment. On station, of course, you have humans, and so there's a little bit of a disadvantage there where humans are moving around, and so it's not perfect microgravity on Cygnus. Once you're away from station, you really have an even better microgravity facility for a decent amount of time, up to a year, like we said. So a lot of new capabilities on this mission that we're excited to be doing on NG-11. And so I guess that's it. If you got any questions, I'm happy to.
Actually, we have a question from social media.
Okay.
Chelsea?
Yeah, so Twitter user Skylar asks, where will the next Cygnus be launching from? So is the next CRS contract also going to launch from Wallops?
Yes. So NG-12 is the next mission, and it actually is supposed to launch later this year in the fall, also in Antares rocket. So it'll be a little bit larger in terms of capability of the amount of cargo that we can fly to space station. And but it will be the same Antares rocket, also increased capability with that Antares rocket. And on this mission, we mentioned 6 bags are going to be loaded at L-24. Something new about NG-12, we'll be able to fly up to 24, load up to 24 bags very late in the flow at L-24 hours. So those are some of the new things that are coming, being launched again out of here, just like we are tomorrow.
Thank you. Do we have questions in the room? Would you like to speak?
Kramer, Space Up Close. Thank you for doing this. About the late load, I got a couple of questions. Can you go into some more detail about what's the weight of these packages? How long will this work take? And tell us a little bit about the experiments specifically. What besides the rodents, what are the experiments you're going to be loading? Thanks.
Okay, sure. So I mentioned 6 bags that we're loading on this mission. The size is approximately a locker size, so about this big. And 30 to 40 pounds is about the average weight of the lockers going in there. So there's 4 kind of solid mid-deck lockers, and there are 2 soft bags, which are cold bags that we'll be loading also into the vehicle, about the same size. So 4 solid mid-deck lockers and 2 soft bag, cold bag lockers that are going onto the vehicle. In terms of what's going on there, 2 of those are rodent lockers. One of them is called an AEMT, which provides the environmental control system for the rodents to be able to survive in space. So it scrubs the CO2. We also on this vehicle now can measure the environment, the O2, and other things that we need to measure for the environment to ensure that we've got a good environment for animals, rodents to live in the 2 days that we ascend to station and to deliver them to the space station in good shape.
Besides the rodents.
What's that?
Besides the rodents, what are some
Besides
of
the
the
rodent,
experiments?
I guess I'd have to defer to the NASA folks on the other science experiments. You want to take that, Pete? You probably know better than I do.
So a couple of them are in the physical sciences area. One is the Advanced Colloids Experiment, ACE-T10, and it's one of the experiments. It's physical sciences. It's not biological, but it needs to be at a controlled temperature and loaded late so that it doesn't lose those properties on the way to station. Canada has a bioanalyzer. Again, there are samples that will be analyzed, and these are just like blood samples, so they need to be kept conditioned and loaded late. There are 1 or 2 other experiments, and I can look those up and tell you afterwards.
Do we have other questions in the room? Wait for your mic, please.
Thank you. Hi, Andrew. Chelsea, space.com. I'm curious, it seems like Cygnus's solar array is deploying later than it has with past missions. Is this the case? And if so, why is it deploying later after the launch than usual?
So with our more recent missions, we do have something called a tab, which to my knowledge is not really later in the flow. So as soon as we deploy from Antares, we begin the sequence of preparing Cygnus for flight, including deploying the arrays. So it should still be within the first hour of flight that we deploy those arrays. I'll confirm that, but that's my understanding of the sequence of events. One of the things that we are going to do starting with CRS-2 is after insertion on orbit, we're going to insert a little bit lower, and so automatically that tab burn allows us to move to a safe orbit really quickly in case we're inserted too low for some reason. So as part of that sequence of getting the spacecraft ready, the solar array deployment does still happen fairly early in the flow.
Do you have any more questions in the room? Yes, sir.
You mentioned the technology or the capability of allowing Cygnus to linger for up to a year. Is there new technology or capability on board Cygnus for space debris avoidance?
Nothing new for space debris avoidance. We use the same resources that the space station used to track debris along the way, and so obviously we'll need to pay just as much attention as we always do, but we won't be, attached to the station, so we have to do our own folks on console to make sure that we're paying attention to that. But nothing new in terms of how we are doing that. It's just for an extended period of time, and so you need a mission ops control center that's paying attention for a longer period of time.
I understand we have another question from social media. Chelsea?
Yes, we have a question from Facebook. Will the cargo size ever increase in future missions?
Cargo size? So one thing that's really nice about our vehicle is it allows for really large bags to be stowed inside. And so this mission actually provides several, I think it's 20 or so really large bags that go into the vehicle. And so also with CRS-2, that capability increases even more larger bags. I don't have the exact number, but it's a big number. It's higher than 20. And so this is a good mission for allowing NASA to provide a bit larger things, larger experiments in big bags. An example of that is a Sapphire experiment that, not on this mission, but on the next mission, requires very large bags. So that's an advantage for the PCM.
Thank you. Well, I have one more question in the room.
Peter Coles, WSKB. I'm just wondering, with the extended mission time after you depart the station, when did the scientific community become aware of it, and how's the coordination with NASA? Are they going to move any experiments that start on the ISS over to Cygnus to continue it in a pure microgravity environment?
So we've been talking about this for a while now, over the past couple years, and so this is the first time we're sort of proving it, and it should be getting word out there as we're doing this. It's sort of the first experiment of, can we do this? Can we fly Cygnus by itself without station for a long time? And so that should open the door for more experiments to be able to do things on our vehicle. Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Zarechnik. Sure. Next, we'll have our next speaker. I'd like to introduce you to Maria Boilet.
Okay, so I'm here to introduce you to some new robots who are going to be on board space station soon. We have two Astrobee free-flying robots that will be launching on NG-11. I'm passing around, for those of you in the audience, there's a little scale model that's going around. There are no moving parts on there, so don't tug too hard on it and don't play catch with it. It's really cute. But this is a full-scale mock-up of the robot, so this is the actual size. And these will be soon flying around in the U.S. orbital segment of the space station, helping astronauts out, doing some routine chores for them, and also doing more research and science as a microgravity test bed, replacing the Spheres test bed. If we can roll the first video showing Spheres. So Spheres has been on orbit for over a decade, and one of their biggest jobs is actually carrying other payloads. So they allow researchers to try out new technologies in microgravity in a relatively safe environment, because it's a shirt-sleeve environment, temperature controlled, and crew is there to help out as necessary. But they have been there for a long time. They're kind of limited in their compute power, and they're just aging. And so we're replacing them with the Astrobee. So we've built in a lot of features in the Astrobee to actually facilitate research. One is that there are multiple payload bays. So I'll just turn this around so you can see better. So we have these open areas here on the robot where you can plug in, both on the top and bottom, payloads very easily. The Astrobee is battery powered and it can supply power to those payloads. And the payloads can even put some software on the main computer of the robot and control the way the robot flies. So if we can start the next video showing the construction of these robots, the heart of the robot is really sort of this core module that you see here, and that's where the brains are. There are 3 processors on board. You can see in the video those boards there in the center. And they are basically the same processes that are on your smartphones. So we can control various levels, the motors or the vision system that allows the robot to know where it's going. So the robot actually moves using these propulsion modules. So what you're seeing here now is construction of one of the propulsion models. There are 2 per robot. And this only works inside the station because it pulls air in through that circular central fan, which lightly pressurizes the propulsion module. And then there are 6 nozzles on each side, so 12 total, that open and close, and that is how the robot moves around the station. The robot has a lot of cameras and instruments on board. The main camera for observing what's on board station is this. There's a high-definition camera here in the center that we can stream video, and this allows controllers on the ground to see what's going on. If we can switch back to the video, so what we're seeing here now is actually the robot on our granite table. And this table acts, it's sort of an inverted air hockey table, where instead of the air coming up out of the table, the air comes out of the puck. So the robot, the cube on top, as you see here, that's the robot, and everything else below that is just the air carriage. So that's how it has a frictionless surface that it can move around as if it were on station. This is how we test the propulsion module. Of course, we can only move in 2 dimensions and rotate about 1 axis when we're on the table. So we'll be flying 3 robots on station and a docking station, which you see here. The robot is actually autonomously maneuvering to plug itself into the docking station so that it can charge and get a wired connection to the ground, well, not to the ground, but to the station network. So whenever it's operating, as the battery level goes low, it can actually return to home, plug itself in. It's sort of your in-space Roomba. There are a bunch of other cameras on here. Some of them are used for navigation. We have a nav cam. The way the robot navigates is by comparing a map of features that it carries internally with what it's currently seeing, so it knows where it is on orbit. And as I mentioned, it has a dock, so the backside here is our docking port, our docking connection. So we have a couple of cups that mate with those lances on board, and a connector, which is how it charges and gets a network connection. There's also just a couple more features on here, such as we have some like bumpers on the corners, so it's nice and cushy, won't break anything, that's pretty much most of the robot's features.
Thank you, questions? Maria.
Oh, I did want to mention we do have a website, www.nasa.gov/astrobe. There are a bunch of videos on there as well. We have a video page. If you could just run that really quick, we can start the questions while the video goes. But I just have a little sampling of what's available. We have some videos of some of our prototyping, our early development of the robot. Some animations showing what it should look like when it's operating there. And there's actually 2 crew training videos on there. So if you want to learn about Astrobe the same way the crew will, you can watch those. So we have training where we show describe the Astrobe, describe its capabilities, show some simulations of how it works, and also train the crew on how to use the crew control station, which is the piece of software that runs on the laptops that crew can actually use to control the robot.
Okay. So Maria, we have a couple questions from social media, if you're ready.
Yep.
So Twitter user L. Sullivan asks, how many do you hope to have in orbit?
So we will have 3 in orbit eventually. So 2 are launching on NG-11, and then the 3rd one will be joining it later this summer. So each robot is color-coded and has its own individual name. So in general, they are Astrobes. The yellow one is Honey. The green one is Queen, and the blue one is Bumble. So that's how we distinguish them. This one here, this is actually an actual flight-type skin. It says Killer on it, so this is our Killer bee here, but it's our stunt double. It's not an actual working robot.
Okay, we have a question in the room.
Thank you. Jared Hayworth with We Report Space. I noticed in your demonstration video that the robot was fitted with blue indicator lights. Have you also fitted it with red lights to warn the astronauts if it should happen to turn evil?
So the funny thing is we're not allowed to use red on orbit because red means there's something really seriously wrong going on. So we generally do not use red lights. There are a bunch of lights on the robot. There's some indicator lights in the front that show the audio-video state. And then there's a bunch of LED signal lights on both propulsion modules that can show like turn signals or part of what we want to do on orbit is understand better how astronauts and robots can interact. And so it's actually a research topic to look at how signal lights, we actually also have a touchscreen, how a robot can interact with an astronaut in space. So red is out, yellow is actually also out, and blue, we actually use blue to indicate that there's a microphone on because crew likes to know if there's a live mic. But other than that, we can use any other color.
Thank you.
Maria, we have another question from social.
Okay.
So I have a couple of questions on social media here about, is it considered like more of a science experiment? Will it be doing experiments, or is it more designed to help the astronauts? And if so, can you speak a little bit more about how it will be helping the astronauts out in their day-to-day?
Okay, yeah, it's actually both. So it can be used for science and technology development, as I mentioned, replacing the spheres. So it can carry other payloads that want to test in microgravity. But it also can be used as a tool by ground controllers. So we can use the camera to do video surveys or to observe crew activities so that the ground can be actually ready to answer any question the crew might have in a complex activity. And they also don't have to take crew time to move the camera. So if the camera happens to be placed badly and crew can kind of get in the way, they can actually just fly the camera to another location. The other thing that we can do is we can carry other instruments. So, excuse me, we can carry sensors for environmental understanding. So, for instance, CO2 sensors to understand the concentrations. We can carry radiation sensors. We also can carry RFID readers that can do inventories and find lost tools or lost equipment that we're not sure where it is. We can actually fly the robot around and look for equipment needed for other experiments. So in that way, we don't have to have crew looking for a needed piece of equipment.
Okay, we'll take one or two more questions from the room.
Hi, hi, Josh Jenner with the Orbital.Space. I have a few questions. So in the demo videos, the Astrobees are shown moving around cargo. I was wondering about their ability to work in tandem, and I guess is there a mass capacity for each versus with all three working together for the type of cargo it can and cannot move? I'm also wondering about the gecko grippers. They were sent up on a cargo flight a couple of years ago. And
actually, they're coming up.
Oh, is there a version
in the summer?
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So are the Astrobees going to be utilizing the gecko grippers to be moving cargo and things?
So let's see, that's a complex question. Let me start at the beginning. So we do have a perching arm that we've developed internally. So it has a limited capability of grabbing things. It's not very dexterous. It can't hold onto handrails or handles. And there is limited thrust. And part of that is actually for safety reasons. So we've limited the thrust of the propulsion system. So there is a mass limit to what we can move. Trying to remember the sequence here. And the gecko grippers, so we have a gecko gripper that actually interfaces with our perching arm. Initially, it's going to be looking at using that for perching instead of grabbing hold of a handrail, just sticking to a wall. So any clear space, you could actually perch the robot and just hold on to the wall, and possibly for moving some light equipment as well. So we do have some video, as you mentioned, some of our early prototyping where we used a gecko gripper to grapple another object. And so those sorts of experiments can take place on Astrobee on station.
Okay, I do have one more follow-up. With the Astrobees planning to be doing inventory, moving cargo, and all these other sort of smaller jobs, is there an estimate for how much time is actually being saved to the astronauts in orbit? And are the Astrobees being used, or is there plans to utilize the technologies going into Astrobees for any sort of autonomous robots for the Moon 2024 goal?
Yes, so First off, we haven't done a complete analysis of all the time that can be saved. One thing we did look at was, for instance, there are sound surveys done on station that takes crew about 2 hours to do. So that's an example of the type of time that can be saved with a robot doing that task. For future missions, absolutely, those sorts of tasks can be taken over by a robot for Moon to Mars, any exploration vehicle. We expect to have these sort of robotic helpers. Also, for things like Gateway, there's only going to be crew on about a couple of months out of the year. So you'll have an empty vehicle that you would like to monitor, and so robots can help actually look for issues on the Gateway and perhaps even address them, do repairs.
Thank you.
Alex Mankiewicz of the Zog 43 newsletter. Could you give us an idea of what you really want to see for success, such as a milestone, critical things that you really want to see out of here to declare it?
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do when we get on orbit is we're going to commission the robot. So as you've seen, they've only ever flown in 2D, with this propulsion system. We have actually, so you saw the way it was mounted, we can't actually exercise the Z nozzles in that orientation. We have actually flipped it sideways and mounted it so that we were basically flying sideways, so we have used those nozzles, but we've never actually flown in 3D. So the first thing we're going to do is actually commission these robots. We're going to check them out, make sure everything survived fine after launch, and then actually start basic flying. And then eventually we'll move on to autonomous work, so autonomous docking, autonomous path, flying in complex motions autonomously. So we do have a couple of milestones of checking out the robots, of autonomous operations, and then we'll finally hand it over to the facility team that currently runs Spheres. They will be running the facility with Astrobee.
Thank you. Our last question will be from social media.
So Facebook user Rochelle Kelly asks, will these robots be made for domestic life? So how will this piece of space tech help life on Earth?
Well, we are developing, as I mentioned, we're working on human-robot interaction, and we're seeing more and more robots here on Earth. So we can certainly apply some of what we learn about interaction between humans and robots on station to robotics here on Earth. The sky is not the limit as to the type of payloads that we see on this sort of platform. So Spheres has flown all kinds of interesting science experiments and technology experiments. So it's really hard for us to envision the sorts of things that we're going to be seeing in the coming years with Astrobee that are going to be flown as experiments.
Thank you, Maria. And for those of you who didn't get to ask questions during Maria's segment, we'll also have the time after the broadcast. Okay, next we'll hear from Dr. Dmitry Starodubov, Chief Scientist of FOAMS and Principal Investigator of the Space Fibers Investigation. Welcome, Dmitry.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I present here space fibers payloads by small business company FOAMS in San Diego, California. We live an exciting time where the lift capacity to low Earth orbit becomes amazingly affordable. What we are trying to do is to utilize this capacity for manufacturing on lower Earth orbit. In this mission, we are launching 2 payloads, as you can see on the picture. One of these payloads is scientific, built for research. The second one is the first commercially sponsored manufacturing payload that goes to International Space Station. Simply put, we are launching the first space factory to International Space Station. We did all the testing of these payloads. We will be making specialty optical fiber. The interesting feature of specialty optical fiber for the space economy is that optical fibers have unique value to mass ratio, and optical fibers are widely used on Earth for data transmission. So they are used for backbone of our data plans for cell phones. So just to give you an example, an optical fiber, specialty optical fiber, would be sold by a meter and will cost around $250 per meter. Now, 1 kilogram of specialty fiber preform should be able to produce multiple kilometers, let's assume 40 kilometers of optical fiber. That brings the value of optical fiber to millions per kilogram, while the lift price for optical fiber is in tens of thousands of dollars. So we see an interesting opportunity to commercially utilize International Space Station for sustainable manufacturing. We are launching 2 payloads. The total capacity of these 2 payloads is 100 kilometers. There are 4 experiments in these 2 payloads. Our payloads have unique manufacturing efficiency. We can produce optical fiber with our payloads with efficiency of 1 kilometer of optical fiber per pound of payload, which is quite a unique value. Our development is sponsored by NASA, SBI program, ISS National Lab. We have commercial partner, and we have our integrator Space Tango supporting us in this development. In this mission, we will run the field of value parameters for manufacturing, and the follow-up missions we will do volume manufacturing of optical fibers on International Space Station. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. We'll have more questions for you. Do we have any questions in the room for Dr. Starodubov about the space fibers investigation?
Hello there. I'm Arsenio Menendez out of NASA Goddard. I'm curious about what your transmittance levels of your on-orbit fibers are compared to the terrestrial manufactured ones.
The question is how much better we can make the fibers on the International Space Station compared to the ground transmission. The fibers that we are sending in this experiment are Z-band type fluoride optical fibers that have transparency from ultraviolet to mid-infrared. The immediate opportunities for these fibers in remote sensing and defense applications, but there's a wide market opportunity for telecom applications as well.
Thank you.
Good question. Do you have any other questions in the room? On the phone? All right. Thank you, Dr. Starodubov. Okay. Before we get to our next speaker, I'd like to remind you that NASA TV's live coverage of the launch will begin at 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Wednesday, April 17th. For NASA TV downlink information, schedules, and links to streaming video, visit nasa.gov/NASATV. The space station is a robust laboratory that is being regularly replenished with new experiments. In fact, in the next week, we have another cargo resupply mission heading to the orbiting laboratory. Be sure to tune back in to NASA coverage next week. Ready? Next, we'll hear from Bob Twiggs, Professor of Astronautics and Space Science at Morehead State University. He is also the co-inventor of the CubeSat, and he's a representative of the Twiggs Space Lab. We'll also hear from Chris Hale, the program manager for Virginia Space ThinSat program. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here to talk to you about the CubeSat program. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. We started this program the late 90s to use for engineering students to get into space. One of the problems that we had was the size of satellites that we were using. The students kept putting more and more experiments in the satellite, and we'd say, you know, let's get this thing done. And they'd say, well, you get us a launch and we'll finish this up. And so we decided the only way to get them to put less things in is make it much smaller. So we started looking for a size of something that we could get small, and we knew if we had things that were small, our opportunity to get a launch was much more. So one of the things that you do when you go to find a new satellite is you got to figure out what the size is and what the shape is. So the first place that I went to was a plastic store, and they had 4-inch boxes that at that time were used for Beanie Babies. So that's the that's where this concept come from. It, you know, it wasn't any you know, unique engineering design or anything else. It was a Beanie Baby box, and so we worked around that. So you can see the CubeSat here and see the size that it is. And when we proposed in the early 2000s to launch these things, it was a very interesting concept of how the community viewed this. They viewed it with comments like stupid. Who would ever use this thing? It's so tiny you can't put any experiments in it. And so it was not accepted very well, and we said, oh, good. You don't need to use it. We want this for engineering students. And, you know, we kind of ask if you'd please don't come, please don't help us. But it gained some popularity later on when they found out that, hey, the cell phone market reduced the size of things, and now they could put something, you know, pretty good in this. Plus the price of getting them launched was down, and we fixed the size of the box that they could put it in. But the thing that happened was the price of the launches went up. You know, when you get the big guys in here, they have more money than the universities have or the education systems have. So, you know, we decided, well, if it was too small for them, maybe they'd leave us alone if we made it smaller. So what we did is come up with the idea of this little thing, and we called it a pocket cube. You know, it fits in your pocket. And we come to the conclusion that, hey, we could, in the same volume that a CubeSat is, we could launch 8 of these. Oh boy, 8 of them. Now you take the price of a launch and you divide it by 8, and it almost is the cost that you can do in a bake sale, you know. So we were getting there a lot closer. Well, we looked around for launches and actually got some of these launched on a Russian rocket in 2013. And it was a very interesting experiment, because if you go get a CubeSat now and you buy a commercial radio off the shelf for a CubeSat, they're about $5,000. So we got this $14 radio and put in it. And it worked, you know. We didn't get high data rate out of it, but it worked. And so that's kind of our motto, is how cheap can we go and still make it work in space. But we didn't have any U.S. launches, and so about 3 years ago, a guy that I knew from Orbital ATK, Warren Frick, we cornered him at a meeting in Utah, and walked up to Warren. I said, hey, Warren, I understand you might have some room on your second stage. Could we get these on here? And I've known Warren for a long time. If anybody knows Warren, he's a big guy, you know, and I went up close like that, but then I backed up to get out of his reach. Anyway, I'm really surprised. Warren says, I think I might have something for you. And that created an unheard of event in the space industry. He came back here to Dale Nash at Virginia Space, and within 1 month, we were in the office over at Orbital TK, and they had on a manifest pocket cubes. That's what we call these, pocket cubes. And we said, wow, we can really get them launched. They said they had been working on things, and they said, yeah, we think we got an opportunity to launch them. So we went to some people in Indiana, near Space Launch, people that I'd known for quite a while, and I said, hey, Hank, we want to put a lot of electronics and make this a really high standard product. And he looked at that and he said, you know, that's pretty small to put stuff in. But he says, you know, ultimately he come up with this idea of a thin-sat. And everybody says a pea pod, which you put 3 CubeSats in, is like a bread box, right? So we just slice the bread up. And that's what you see here on the table is the thin-sat. Well, you know, my whole passion in the industry and in the academia is kids' education. I got really turned on by being able to do something in space. And if you can get these kids turned on, boy, you've got to step out of the road or they're going to run right over the top of you. So doing something like this at a cost that you could get down into the elementary schools, and we do have thin-sat projects in the elementary schools, I think it's really great. And I know a lot of you have seen this commercial about the Kix cereal. What do they say in there? You know, leave my Kix alone. Well, that's what the kids ought to say. Leave my thin-sat alone, and so they'll be able to get experiments in space. But think of what that's going to do for the space industry. If you can start a kid with his own satellite that had a sensor in it up in space when he's in elementary school, and he does it in junior high, and he does it in high school, and he does it in the university, boy, you're going to have some good products out of it. So I'll let Chris here tell you a little more about the thin-sats, but we're excited about this.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Bob stole a couple of my lines, but that's okay. So the thin-sat program, the Virginia Space thin-sat program, is at its heart a STEM outreach program. The Commonwealth of Virginia, if we can get the first slide up, the Commonwealth of Virginia has been kind enough to back us to provide the hardware that Bob has provided and Near Space Launch has provided to elementary schools up through colleges at no cost to them. So it's a STEM outreach program where the students can work on the hardware, the same kind of hardware that we're using to build satellites, to build experimental satellites. Next slide. We leverage our colleges and our local institutions to be the lead institutions, and what that is they do the outreach work for us to the local schools and the elementary schools, the middle schools, and near them. For that mentorship, we then allow them to fly with us as well. So the colleges who have a little bit more understanding of engineering and electronics and mechanical engineering and stuff are able to build their own custom payloads if they so choose. And for doing that outreach and mentorship for us, they are able to then fly their payload on our missions as well. So we are currently active in over 11 states with over 50 schools. We have the Coast Guard Academy, we have the Naval Academy, and over 400 students. Tomorrow for the launch, we're actually hosting over 100 of our thin-sat participant students with their friends and families and teachers as well. So it's a big opportunity for them to come see a launch and actually to see something that they worked on, go to space, thanks to Twig Space Labs and Near Space Labs, or Near Space Launch as well. Next slide. So it was our partnership with Northrop Grumman and with the Antares program that allowed us, and as Bob mentioned, to allow us to get the volume, the space on the second stage of the Antares rocket. So we are actually on the avionics ring, which is the part that's just underneath Cygnus. So we are what's considered a secondary payload. The Cygnus goes to the space station. We do not. We deploy just below the space station. We also have a partnership with NASA and NASA Wallops Flight Facility and the USIT program, which is the Undergraduate Students Instrumentation Project. And they built the payload that's in the first one. So what you see up there is 4 containerized satellite dispensers. Each one has, so the first one has the SASE in it. So that's a payload that was built by University of Illinois and University of Indiana through the USIT program with assistance from NASA. And the other 3 bread loaves, as Bob said, are our payloads, and each one of those has 21 thin-sats. So each of these thin-sats, we have 21 of these in each of those CSDs. So we're launching 63. Thank you, Bob. We're launching 63 satellites. So what Bob has here, you can go ahead and hold it. I'll just point at it. What Bob has here is the thin-sat. So this is what the students are working on and building. This part over here is the bus that Near Space Labs or Near Space Launch and TSL designed. And we give the students this space. So this is their payload space. So the students can design whatever can fit in that space and whatever is safe for us to launch as well, with our cooperation with Northrop Grumman. But we give the students pretty much free reign to fit something in that space, and they can send that to space. So that's part of the excitement for the students, as Bob said, is that they get to touch the things that actually go to space. Okay. One more slide. 2 more slides, actually. So as I mentioned, we don't actually go to the space station. You'll see on this slide, number 9 is where Cygnus leaves the second stage. We deploy on after the Cygnus leaves the second stage, so we turn back towards the Earth, come down a little bit, and then we deploy off. And this is just a little bit of our con ops. So we're anticipating, or hoping at least, to get our first signal from the ThinSats in roughly 15 minutes after launch. That could be up to 55, depending on where we go, because as we are launching, we're launching towards the dark side of the Earth, opposite where the sun is going. And we're dependent on the solar signal, so we have to see the sun to get our first signal. So if we don't get it the first 15 minutes, we'll get it when it comes back around. Next slide, please. And the last slide is just to explain where we are. So part of the excitement of what we're doing is that we get to do experiments in extreme low Earth orbit, so ELEO. That's generally 100 to 300 kilometers of space. So not a lot of stuff goes on in that area except things going through it to go to space and things coming back through it to come back to Earth. So we're going to spend 5 to 10 days orbiting Earth in the extreme low Earth orbit before we come back into Earth as well. So it's going to give us a lot of information that doesn't normally get picked up in that area. And Bob has one more thing.
Do you know why we picked 5 days? That's the attention span of the students.
But they will be able to access that data the entire time, even if they lose their attention span.
Are we ready for questions?
Yes.
Okay, we got one.
Video, if we can.
Sure.
We can take questions during the video.
Okay. I understand we have a social media question.
Yeah, so a Facebook user asks, does a ThinSat have a way to move around in space?
No, the ThinSats do not maneuver at this time. We've already started our second plan, our second mission, and the science, as Bob's talking about, even though it's really small and it's really tight, the science is already it's growing exponentially. So they currently don't have a way to maneuver. We don't want them to have a way to maneuver. It's kind of our thing at this point, but we're not against it. But currently they do not have a way to maneuver, no.
And then we have another question from Facebook. Morgan Beebe wants to know, how long does it take to power a CubeSat, and then how long does the power last?
Okay, so they have batteries. We send them up with batteries, nominally 75 to 85% charged, and they also have solar cells, which you can see on this mock-up. So the ThinSats go out in strings of 3 to 6, and in between them is solar cells. So they do use their own batteries, and then they charge their batteries on the solar cells as they're rotating around Earth in their orbit. The time to burn them down, we don't know that exactly yet, because we're only operating at 100 to 150 milliamps. So we're not sure about the time for them to run out of power yet. So that's part of the science experiment, is to find out how long we can run.
Sounds good. Questions in the room? Yep.
How does the downlink work for data?
You want to answer that one?
We use Globalstar. And this is really neat because you don't have to have a ground station. It can transmit to it, continuously goes around in the daylight or the dark. And the data comes back on the internet. So for our students' sake, it comes right back into the classroom. They get to see it live.
Yeah, we have a website. It's called the Space Data Dashboard. And all of the students and all their payloads actually have their own charts. So whatever their experiment is, they give us the information and we chart that for them for the information that we receive down. And it's near real time.
Okay, do we have another question in the room?
Hi, I understand that some half-view CubeSats recently had launch licenses denied due to their size. Could you speak a little bit about how trackable ThinSats are compared to the pocket cubes and CubeSats?
That is an excellent question, and that is part of the science that we're doing as well. We do have our license. We are working with the Air Force and with the Hoosier Radar in Boston to determine how small they can track. They have a limit right now that they're allowed to track, and we're hoping to give them locations and times of where we are so they can see us. And that's part of the science of this as well. So they're very interested in that.
might add one thing on that. One of the reasons that we wanted to tether them together was to give them a larger radar cross-section so that they could track them. I think we only have a very, very few of those that are single thin-sats alone.
Yeah, we currently have no single thin-sats on this mission. They'll all be tethered in 3s or 6s.
Any other questions in the room?
Sorry, now I actually really love this project, but the right now, so each student or each team only gets one thin-sat, or are they able to work in tandem or 3s or whatever all together, or is it just one thin-sat per project?
Well, first of all, thank you for loving the project. It is an amazing project, and I thank Bob and all of his team for bringing it to us. Right now, what we do is we do it in groups. So the lead institution, and we generally 2 to 3 STEM outreach schools for them. So they have the opportunity or the option to build a string where they can all communicate, or they can all share the same data, or each team can build an individual thin-sat. It spreads a gambit. We have a participant in the next mission that actually put all 3 of them together. So we call each of these a 1T. So this is 1T for the sake of this. So the students can put together a 3T, and it's all combined together so they can share the data. The great thing about this program, additionally, is that all this data is available to everyone. So you might not have a sensor on your payload, but you could use someone else's sensor to get data and compare it to your data. Or you can, if you'd use your STEM outreach, you could have them use a sensor that you don't want to put on yours, so you could put something else in your place. So the great thing is the redundancy, the data sharing, and just the mass amounts of science we can get from such a very small product.
Okay, I think we have 2 social media questions.
So 63 thin-sats is a lot of thin-sats. A question from Facebook wants to know, how do they not collide with each other in orbit?
So back when we talked to the Connex slide, we actually deploy them at different times. So we deploy them 10 seconds apart from each other. The SASE payload is an entire 3U, so it was the size of that entire CSD. Then ours come out in what we call bread loaves. So the 3s or 6s will be put together by a burn wire. So they can't contain together until they go out, until they see, until they deploy, and then they'll spread out. So we're hoping that the ejection rate from the CSD and the fact that we're ejecting them separately will prevent them from colliding into each other.
And then our other question, so we've had a bunch of questions on how the data gets transmitted if it's publicly available, so thank you for answering that. Another question that we have from Twitter this time is, can you talk a little bit more about some of what the projects and the data that they're collecting?
We can. Actually, I took notes on that to be ready to answer that question. So it's a lot. There's a lot of things that are in there. So we're doing temperature. A lot of temperatures and pressures are a big deal to know what the temperatures are. The great thing about the temperature sensors is, especially for the students, is that they can track their temperature as it's flying around and through the orbit. But once it starts to burn in, then they can see that huge increase of the temperature as it starts to burn in through Earth's atmosphere. We're doing particle detection. We actually have a couple IMUs that are flying, so we're going to use that to model the flight of the payload. So there's a couple different ways this can go. It can just tumble, or it could turn into a gravitational pull, which will mean the heaviest part of the payload string will be towards Earth, and the rest of it will kind of fly perpendicular to Earth, if you will. So there's a lot of different things, and we hope to get that from the IMU, which is an inertial motion unit. Same thing you have in your cell phones or in your game consoles. Particle detection, orbital degradation. So we want to know how these things are going to react in extreme low Earth orbit. So they go out in a big chunk in the bread boxes. So they'll initially fly pretty well, but once they spread out, they're going to start degrading their orbit right away. So we want to characterize that as well. Yeah, and then just a lot of other things. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool that they're going to come down and burn up, and that seems to excite the elementary students more than anything else. You say, oh, your satellite, what's happening in my satellite when it comes down? Well, it's going to burn up. Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. But think about watching the temperature of this thing comes down. To me, there's a lot of neat things. Experience I had in the past is watching a satellite going around the Earth and be able to detect when it's coming in and out of the sunlight. Maybe I'm you know, pretty dumb, but I like that. I thought that was pretty cool. Think about the magnetic field. Think about the radiation up there. Oh boy, that's going to be cool to watch all that data. And if any of you are interested in the radiation that's around the Earth, it's an interesting subject.
Very cool. Do you have any other questions in the room? Okay.
I just have a quick question. How can educators get kids involved in these kind of programs to get them more in tune into the sciences and space?
So we have a Virginia Space website, and on that website is a link to our ThinSat program. As I said, this is a STEM outreach program provided by the state of Virginia through Virginia Space, and it is at no cost to the schools at this time. We are still working on the program. This is our inaugural mission, so this will be the first time it's flown. So we're still working on the program and the growth of it. So please check out our website. If you don't have it, check with me afterwards. I'll get it to you. And check out the ThinSat program link on there. It also lists all of our schools and our lead institutions, everything that are associated with it, of course.
I'd just like to add from the space station perspective, actually, you know, all the way up in a big orbit, two websites for you. www.STEMOnStation is one of them. And then for the National Lab side, it's Space Station Explorers. And the ISS National Lab really does most of our global education or U.S. education and outreach. So, thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Twig and Mr. Hale. Before we bring up our next group to talk about the Rodent Research 12 investigation, we wanted to share with you a few fun facts. This will be the first time that rodents will be flown on a Cygnus vehicle. Also, did you know that at any given time, there are about 300 experiments being conducted aboard the space station? You can follow all the science happening aboard this orbiting laboratory at ISS_research. And with that, we'll move on to our next speakers. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Tricia Reddick, a postdoctoral fellow, and Nina Nishiyama, a research associate for the Rodent Research Investigation. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you, and thank you so much for coming to learn about our research. So we're a group of biologists from Loma Linda University in Southern California, and we're funded by NASA to do these really cool biology experiments. So here's a quick photo of a few of our members from our team. So on the left, we have Dr. Michael Picot, who is the primary investigator for this experiment. So he's the one who came up with the original proposal. Myself, Bailey Bai, a technician who worked on a lot of the preliminary experiments that helped us get to this stage. Dr. Stephen Keith Chapes, who is a co-I, and also Dr. Tricia Reddick. But the real VIPs here, of course, are our mice. And we've come up with a name for our project. It's called Tetanus Toxoid Antibody Response from B cells in Space, or TARBIS, for those of you who are Doctor Who fans. But Tricia's going to talk a little bit more about the goals of our experiment and the biology behind it.
So this project is actually 7 years in development. Nina and I have both spent basically all of our adult science careers preparing for this. So what our work is we focus on the antibody repertoire. What antibodies are they are proteins produced by B cells, and they are a type of white blood cell, and it's important for fighting infection. And the antibody repertoire is then that collection of antibodies that you have. So our project uses different vaccines. We use the tetanus toxoid vaccine, which is the same vaccine. If you guys were just going to get just a tetanus vaccine, it would be the same thing. We also use an adjuvant that's called CpG, and what this does is this increases the immune response. So our project is looking specifically at the anti-tetanus toxoid repertoire. So we know that space is a unique environment. We know that there's a lot of stresses, both physiological and psychological, that our astronauts undergo. In some cases, this could be things like fluid shifts, it could be exposures to radiation, and they also are not weight-bearing on their legs. So this is important because a lot of the precursors for white blood cells develop in the bone marrow. So these could all play a role. We also know from previous research that astronauts have a lot of problems with immune dysregulation, both during flight and after flight. So we want to see how the antibody repertoire is involved in that. So we also are looking at, so obviously our ideal response here would be that our astronauts, or that our mice, would not have any difference between our ground mice and our space mice. And this would be able to tell us that hopefully our astronauts will be protected in space. But what we're really expecting to see is that there's going to be some form of immune dysregulation. And in our case, we may be able to measure that by less diversity in the antibody repertoire. So how we can use this data is both for ground-based models. So this could be, for example, people who are not weight-bearing. So it could be people that are wheelchair-bound or bed-bound. But we can also use it for things moving forward in space. So once we start moving towards longer spaceflight missions, we need to make sure that our astronauts are protected and what the best way we can do to protect them, and if there's anything we need to do to prepare them to be able to do these longer missions. And Nina's going to go through some of the logistics of our experiment.
Yeah, so one of the really cool things about this project in particular is that we're actually able to run 2 experiments simultaneously. So our first experiment, we want to look at the primary or first antibody response in response to this vaccine, the tetanus toxoid. So to do that, what we're going to do is we'll launch the mice to space, and the astronauts will vaccinate the mice against the tetanus toxoid. For the secondary response, the goal is we want to increase the tetanus toxoid specificity. And to do that, Mike and I have actually been working down at Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the past few weeks, vaccinating our mice here on the ground before we send them to space. So after we send them to space, they will acclimate to the new environment, and then we'll challenge them again with the same vaccine again. After that, we'll allow the immune response to develop, because it takes some time, and then the astronauts will collect tissue samples for us and send it back down to Earth so we can do the data analysis. But I think the coolest part of this experiment is that while the astronauts are up in space doing these experiments, we're here down on the ground doing the exact same things that they're doing. And yeah, that's how we get some really powerful science. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for our speakers in the room? Excuse me, wait for your mic, please.
Space up close. I'm curious. What type of diet will they have? Is it a neutral-based diet? Will that affect the experiments at all? I'm just curious as what they're going to be fed. Thank you.
Oh, so these mice, as well as all of the other rodent missions, have a very special diet. They have a special, we call it a food bar, that's made with a special mix of ingredients so that they have a very well-balanced diet that's comparable to what they have on Earth, so that, you know, we can maintain their health up there.
Thank you. We have any other questions in the room? Yes, sir.
Venus. So that doesn't exist. I just made that up. But you guys have really cool space stuff. Anyway, it seems like there's an awful lot on an astronaut's plate. Like, are you concerned that there's just too much? Are you worried about the execution of the experiment when it's in someone else's hands?
No, I mean, these astronauts have been perfectly trained for this. They've undergone special mission training so that they're able to do what we need them to do. So, I mean, we have full faith in them that everything will work out.
Very good. All right, we have another question in the room.
Alex Mankiewicz of Zog 43 newsletter. How critical is the timing on the vaccination? Let's say the launch gets delayed, say 24, 48 hours, or even birthing gets delayed. Is there some critical timing involved here?
Yes, so we've taken all of those contingencies into account. So we have prepared 4 scrubs, and we work around and make so that we can maximize the science and get the best results that we can.
Okay, any other questions?
I just wanted to ask, like, you said you had two different sets of rats. One's that's getting done here first, and then another set getting vaccinated up there. Just that. So how many rats are in each segment? And just so you have parity, how many rats in each group?
Okay, so we're actually flying mice. The station doesn't currently have the capability to fly rats, only because they're so much bigger. So there will be 40 mice that will go. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Yep.
Hi, John Gould with Living Space. What's the experiment's duration? How much time will pass between launch and collection of the tissue samples from the mice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it will be about 30 days.
Lives or
Got another question in the back. Peter or Rob?
I assume you're using a specific strain of mouse. What were the characteristics you were looking for?
So we're using C57 Black 6J mice, and the reason we're using these guys... What?
Very cool.
Right, okay. So we're using this strain because it's really well characterized. So they're used in a lot of immunological experiments, and because we have all this characterization, we're able to better compare them both to previous experiments and hopefully going forward as well, because there's such a well characterized strain.
I was just talking about how very specific that was, and very cool that you chose that.
This is my life. This is what I do.
Any other questions in the room? Okay, let's thank Dr. Rettig and Ms. Nishiyama. Okay, let's see. I would like to close out by saying thank you to all of our speakers for joining us, and for you at home joining us online as well. I had a couple of plugs for you guys that Pete mentioned earlier. The ISS Program Science Office recently released the 3rd edition of their Benefits for Humanity book, which contains more than 100 stories representative of more than 2,500 scientific research and technology demonstration activities that have taken place on station. You can read the book at nasa.gov/station benefits. Another plug, several additional researchers were highlighted during our pre-launch science teleconference on April 10th. If you missed the opportunity to participate in that call, you can listen to a replay of this teleconference by dialing 866-356-4366. The replay will be available until May 10th. Finally, thank you for joining us today. Remember, the launch is scheduled for tomorrow, Wednesday, April 17th at 4:46 p.m. Eastern. You can follow all the latest research being conducted aboard our orbiting laboratory. Again, follow on @ISS_research on Twitter, or by using nasa.gov/ISS-science. Thank you for joining us on our What's on Board briefing. Thank you and have a good day.
Good afternoon, and welcome to NASA's Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia for our pre-launch news conference for Northrop Grumman's 11th Commercial Resupply Services mission to the International Space Station. The launch of the Cygnus spacecraft, filled with about 7,600 pounds of research, crew supplies, and hardware, is scheduled for tomorrow, Wednesday, April 17th, during a 5-minute launch window that opens at 4:46 p.m. Eastern. Cygnus will launch on an Antares rocket from Pad 0A from Virginia Space's Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport. I'm Stephanie Shearholtz of NASA's Office of Communications, and I'm pleased to have with us this afternoon Joel Montalbano, Deputy Manager of the International Space Station Program, Frank DeMauro, Vice President and General Manager, Space Systems at Northrop Grumman. Kurt Eberle, Antares Vice President, Northrop Grumman. Doug Voss, Deputy Chief of the Range and Mission Management Office at Wallops Flight Facility. And Pete Hasbrook, the Manager of the International Space Station Program Science Office. We'll begin with opening comments from our presenters, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. For those following online, you can send us questions using the hashtag AskNASA. Joel?
All right, well, good afternoon again. I'm going to start with a video with our current crew on orbit. And so let's see if we can roll the video, please.
And liftoff.
So we had a spectacular launch early this year in March, where we brought 3 astronauts and cosmonauts back to the International Space Station, increasing our crew complement to 6. You can see pretty excited. This is the welcome of the crew. Takes just 6 hours from launch to docking to the International Space Station with this launch. You know, we've been doing a lot of research and science on board the International Space Station. You heard some of it earlier today. You'll see a couple pictures, and I'll talk a little bit about it. This picture right here is David from the Canadian Space Agency doing some work on combustion. You know, the work that we can learn on doing how things burn in space allows us to be more efficient with our engines and our rockets, and allows us to load less fuel into the satellites as we launch them into space, allows our rockets to operate more efficiently. And you know, the goal is to deliver the satellite. The goal is not to deliver fuel. And so what we can learn on the International Space Station and have that directly apply to our satellite infrastructure is just a huge benefit to people here on Earth. You see some other experiments here. The NICER experiment, which is a high precision measurement of neutron stars. In fact, some of this research that was recently recognized by the Nature magazine and published, it was published in work we did on board the International Space Station that your researchers on the ground have used to better understand the universe. Going further, you see another experiment here. This is a Canadian experiment where our astronauts wear goggles, and in microgravity they measure the motion, and they measure, you know, how accurate, how the crew members deal with depth, and what they can use that information for is you can use it for the elderly population on Earth. You could use it for some of the different diseases we have on Earth. So the goal is to collect this information on board the International Space Station, and again, directly applying to people here on Earth. If we're going to leave low Earth orbit and go to Mars, we're going to have to grow our food on orbit, and we're going to have to eat it. And so there's a picture of David, you know, using what we grew on orbit and then eating it as a little snack. That was some wasabi lettuce, I believe, that he was eating. So we're doing research on board the International Space Station. We're doing research with all 5 agency. We work together. We combine what we learn on Earth or on orbit, and we bring that back on Earth. So now going specifically to why we're here today with the Cygnus spacecraft and the launch of Antares for tomorrow. Stephanie said the launch of at 1646 local. Once Antares delivers the Cygnus vehicle on orbit, they'll start its rendezvous to the International Space Station. We're planning the capture of the vehicle at 5:30 Eastern Time on Friday, followed by hatch opening about 1 p.m. Friday. 7,600 pounds will be delivered with this vehicle, and that's a combination of utilization and research hardware. It's a combination of vehicle hardware. We have crew supplies. All this hardware is being brought up by this vehicle. And the unique thing from this vehicle here is we now have the ability for a late load. We have the ability to load hardware on board the vehicle at launch minus 24 hours, which we're doing today. And we're taking advantage of this new capability of the Cygnus spacecraft, and we're going to be flying 40 mice. I think you heard that earlier today. And, you know, the goal of the International Space Station program is to do what we can to enhance and increase the science and utilization and the research we can do on orbit. This new capability that was added by the Northrop Grumman team is a step in that direction. And it not only allows us to fly the rodents. We also have, it'll allow us to fly different science, and it'll be a capability that we not only have for this mission, but future missions on the Cygnus spacecraft. So we're excited to be here. And so with that, I want to thank the Wallops Flight Facility, the Northrop Grumman team, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport, and everyone involved in getting the spacecraft to where we are today. I promise if you deliver us a good spacecraft, bring it to the International Space Station, we'll take good care of it. I'll hand it over to Frank.
All right, thanks, Joel. Good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to be back here at Wallops for another mission. This will be our 8th flight of Cygnus on our Antares launch vehicle. And just reminding things, something you probably already know, but this is the 314th anniversary of Isaac Newton being knighted by Queen Anne. And this is the 152nd birthday of Wilbur Wright. So 2 very special people in the science community. We'd also like to thank the team here at Wallops, at NASA, our partners at NASA Johnson Space Center, as well as here at Wallops Island, of course, Virginia Space, and of course our partners on the Antares team for making this day possible. Looking forward to a successful launch tomorrow. So why don't we cue the video, and I'll just give a little bit of an update of what the spacecraft has been going through and preps for its mission. So here's the service module arriving from our Dulles, Virginia facility where it's assembled and tested. We take the vehicle out of its transport container, we do some tests. While that's going on, we also unpack the pressurized cargo module, which arrives directly from our partner Thales Alenia Space in Italy. Those modules are mated to create the Cygnus vehicle. In past missions, we've actually loaded cargo before this point in time, but with the new cargo operations that we do now with the late load, we actually load the cargo later. After we complete making a Cygnus, we bring it to the V55 facility to fuel it, and we install the NanoRacks external CubeSat deployer. After that, we move the vehicle over to the horizontal integration facility where it's loaded with its initial cargo, and then it's mated to the Antares rocket, as you can see here going on in the video. At this point, we have about 2,500 kilograms of cargo on the spacecraft. Once it's mated, we will actually then perform another cargo load, what we call late load, which is another 600 kilograms, about 1,400 pounds of cargo will go into the cargo module. And then once that's completed, we'll do a closeout of the vehicle, making sure the air inside is clean, and then we will close the hatch and seal that for the mission. Once that's completed, then the Antares team takes over, and we will start encapsulating the spacecraft inside the launch vehicle fairing. Once that's complete, the launch vehicle with Cygnus on out to the pad. Eventually, we'll be doing the final load on the pad, as Joel talked about. After we lift off tomorrow afternoon, about 10 minutes later, we'll separate the spacecraft from the launch vehicle, and we'll start our journey up to the International Space Station, raising our orbit and phasing with the station. Along the way, we'll deploy the solar arrays, which are built by our Goleta facility in California. After we do that, we'll check out the spacecraft, make sure it's healthy for its rendezvous. About a day and a half later, Friday morning in this case, we will arrive just below the ISS, about 1,000 meters, and start making our way up towards the station. Once we get about 10 meters below the ISS, the crew will grapple the spacecraft with the canadarm, and then eventually, once it's grappled, it will get maneuvered and attached to the space station and be fully berthed. Once we're there, the crew will check out, make sure everything's in good shape, and then they'll eventually open the hatch, and Cygnus will be part of the space station. The crew will remove the cargo we've delivered and then load it with trash for disposal. On this mission, after we leave the ISS, after about 3 months there, we'll actually raise the orbit above the ISS. We'll deliver our CubeSats from our external CubeSat deployer by NanoRacks, as well as our Slingshot deployer. It'll be our 2nd mission for Slingshot and our 7th mission for NanoRacks. And after that mission is complete, we're going to start an extended duration mission for Cygnus, where we're going to demonstrate the ability of Cygnus to fly for long periods of time in space, where it can be an excellent test bed for scientific experiments, where we can check out new technologies for deep space exploration. And we'll also demonstrate the ability for Cygnus to fly with 2 vehicles in space at the same time and offer that capability not only to NASA, but commercial industry and other government industries. So we're excited for that demonstration to happen after we perform the primary mission of delivering the cargo. And finally, in keeping with tradition, Northrop Grumman names each Cygnus spacecraft in honor of someone who significantly contributed to the U.S. human spaceflight program. For NG-11, we dedicate this mission to Roger Chaffee, who was selected by NASA to what would have been the first manned mission of the Apollo program. Tragically, Roger Chaffee and crewmates Gus Grissom and Ed White died in an accident during a launch simulation. Unlike his crewmates, Lieutenant Commander Chaffee had not yet traveled to space, and we're honored that our Cygnus spacecraft will represent Roger Chaffee's planned journey to space, reminding us all of those who made the ultimate sacrifice so that others could pursue their dreams of space exploration. One other thing I'd like to note, this is the final mission of our CRS-1 contract. When I think back when we first started this, looking ahead to what would be our last mission seemed like so long ago. But here we are, and I just want to thank the many, many people at Northrop Grumman, at NASA, all around the country, and all around the world for making this program possible. And now we look forward to completing this mission successfully and then moving on to our CRS-2 mission. So go Cygnus, go Antares, and with that, I'll turn it over to Kurt.
All right, thank you, Frank. On behalf of the Antares team, we are really excited to be back here at Wallops with our NASA and our Virginia space partners for another Antares launch. We had a very successful NG-10 launch this past November 17th at 4 a.m. I'm sure many of you were here. It was an amazingly clear night, and thank you to all the amateur photographers up and down the East Coast who sent out some really amazing pictures and video of the vehicle all the way to orbit. So, and Joel, on behalf of the viewing public, after 4 straight night launches, I would like to thank you and the ISS program for arranging the orbit of the ISS to produce the wonderful 4:46 p.m. launch time tomorrow. So we really appreciate that. I'm sure all of you appreciate that as well. But seriously, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the folks who enable us to do these launches. I'd like to recognize Dale Nash and his Virginia space team who operate and maintain Launchpad 0A that we launch off. They do an outstanding job, and we appreciate the excellent support from the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'd also like to thank Doug Voss, David Pierce, who is the new facility director here at Wallops, and we welcome him. And we also like to thank Bill Robel, who was the prior director, for his service and his strong support of our program over the past decade. We really appreciate the Wallops Range team for the outstanding support we receive and the flexibility they give us. We also got great support from the community in the area, hotels and restaurants, and appreciate everyone's interest and enthusiasm for this program. So a big thank you to everyone. I'd like to roll a video that highlights the Antares processing. All right, in this video, we highlight the outstanding Antares and Cygnus team members who have worked extremely hard over the past 6 months to put this mission together. It's truly an honor to be a part of this team and get to help lead such a professional and dedicated team. It's truly the team behind the system that makes a launch successful. We begin systems integration of our Antares vehicle in the Horizontal Integration Facility, or the HIF, here at Wallops. We have the capability to integrate 2 vehicles at once, as you can see. Here we're showing the final phase of rocket integration, and after fueling, Cygnus is brought into the HIF, then rotated to horizontal to allow initial cargo loading to take place. And seen here is the first use of our rotating payload mate fixture, which allows cargo to be loaded in all orientations. For this mission, you have heard about our new late load capability. This is accomplished using our new pop-top fairing, which is built at our facility in Iuka, Mississippi. You can see the nose cone coming off there, and that's what we're going to use to access Cygnus and load the final cargo. So after we encapsulate Cygnus in the fairing, we will lift onto the transporter erector launcher that you see there. It's the strong back. We also use that as an umbilical mast, and that rolls about a mile down the road to pad 0A. This is actual footage from this mission, NG-11, so we got some nice daytime footage. Our photographers are very excited that they actually had light for their cameras. And here we rolled up the pad, and there you can see our mobile clean room that we're going to use. It goes over the front of the fairing, and that's where we remove the nose cone and enable access to Cygnus. These are pictures from our Pathfinder that we executed last summer to practice those operations. Here's an actual footage of NG-11 on the pad. We went vertical. We did some tests this morning. We're going to go back down this afternoon, load up cargo this evening, then go back up horizontal overnight, and in the morning we'll lift off and fly Cygnus to orbit. Okay, on Monday we rolled out to the launch pad, connected to the pad, we rotated the vertical. This morning we completed a combined systems test. That verifies all connectivity between the Antares rocket, the Cygnus spacecraft, the launch pad, and the range. That's a really key test for us. That went well. We are now going to rotate the vehicle back to horizontal in the next hour to prepare for final cargo load this evening. The Antares Cygnus team, the combined team, will arrive on console at 11 a.m. tomorrow morning, and the 5-hour countdown will begin at 11:46. We have a 5-minute launch window that opens at 4:46, and we will target the opening of the launch window. I'm very excited to mention that we are partnering with Virginia Space and flying secondary payloads on this mission. We have loaded 60 ThinSats plus one NASA-sponsored 3U CubeSat called SASE onto the Antares avionics section. And 265 seconds after we separate Cygnus, and they're on their way, we will start separating these secondary payloads into orbit. The ThinSats are small STEM satellites built by students from 70 schools located in 9 states: Virginia, Arizona, North Carolina, South Carolina, West Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, Florida, and Connecticut. So a really good footprint and a lot of involvement from across these states. After the ThinSats are deployed, students will collect and analyze data transmitted from their satellite for approximately 5 days before it deorbits and burns up in the atmosphere. And SASE, the 3U CubeSat, is an aerothermal spectrometer spacecraft and was built by students from the Universities of Indiana and Illinois. And we have, I understand we're going to have 200, 250 of these students here to watch the launch, and so you can just imagine how excited they're going to be to see their spacecraft get launched into orbit. All right, and now time for my public service announcement about launch hazard area clearance. I'd like to say a word about public safety and airspace clearance. As you recall, on some past launches far into the past, we have had boats and airplanes travel into the restricted area and force us to scrub for the day. I'd like to encourage everyone who's coming to see the launch to please follow the directions of the Wallops Range personnel and the FAA, the state police, and other public agencies who are working to protect you and ensure the safety of the viewing public. We all want to see a good launch on the first attempt, and we appreciate everyone's cooperation. And we particularly appreciate the extra work the Wallops Range has done to raise public awareness, particularly within the general aviation community. Thank you all for being here. We're looking forward to another good launch tomorrow. Doug?
Thank you very much, Kurt. So as Kurt said, the aviation community and boating community is a group of people that we keep in close touch with on the Wallops Range, and I appreciate that announcement and that extra encouragement on that issue. So the Wallops Range is ready for NG-11, and again, I want to echo the thanks and welcome Northrop Grumman, NASA, all of the users of the Wallops Flight Facility on this mission, on a mission that enables so much good work going on. I mean, we're resupplying space station, supporting science, supporting STEM outreach, so excellent to be a part of that. We've been working for a number of missions on this. This is the 9th launch of Antares from Wallops, and we look forward to continued work on the next CRS-2 contract as well. And a first for this mission at Wallops Flight Facility is the use of the Mission Operations Control Center. And we have a couple photos on showing that facility. The Mission Operations Control Center is a facility on the Wallops main base that will be supporting NG-11 and future missions like this. This mission, or this facility, replaces a nearly 60-year-old launch control center on Wallops Island that was used actually for the first space launch or orbital space launch mission, the Scout, back in the early 1960s. So we've provided Antares and Northrop Grumman a great place to work. They've been working out of a facility that was built in, I think, 1960 or 61 for the last 9 missions. So we look forward to providing this state-of-the-art facility. It exercises state-of-the-art communications, processing, display systems. It has interfaces to all of our launch pads and any launch vehicle that we want to launch from Wallops Flight Facility, our Range Control Center, and other critical systems and facilities. So the team at Wallops on the facilities and the range and engineering side have built a highly resilient facility that's state-of-the-art, and it's going to hopefully carry us another 60 years for ELV launches and other missions from Wallops. So on to the weather, which is something that is a positive note for this mission, at least for the first couple of days. At the LRR today, we had an updated weather briefing from our weather office at Wallops, and we have a slide to show there, but the probability of violation for our primary launch day on the 17th looks very good. It's only 5%. A little bit of concern about low cloud ceilings, but it looks like we're really good in terms of weather for this mission and all the factors that fold into that. As we roll into the second day, if we do, that probability of violation goes up a little bit, but it's still pretty good at 20%. And going into, if we have to go to the 19th on Friday, then probability of violation goes up significantly. So I'm confident that all systems and facilities are going to be go for this mission, and we'll hopefully get it done on the first couple of days. Weather looks good for it. So really on behalf of the Goddard Space Flight Center, the Wallops Director and Wallops Flight Facility and the Wallops Range, again, I want to thank Antares and Northrop Grumman and Johnson Space Center for using Wallops Flight Facility. I want to thank you, the community, for being such a strong supporter of Wallops Flight Facility. We enjoy having you here to come watch our launches, and thank you very much.
Okay, on behalf of the science community, I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. A lot of you were here in the previous briefing, so it's always great to see people coming back and showing interest. The Cygnus launch tomorrow is really important to us in the science community. Almost around half of the cargo that Cygnus is bringing is dedicated to science for us on the International Space Station. Most of that cargo has been pressurized in the past, but we're getting more and more unpressurized cargo on the Cygnus, which is really neat to see. But one of the most important things happening, actually right about now, is this late load. It's a great capability for us. In the science world, a lot of our science and our samples are life limited, whether they are living samples, they need a life support system, or whether they need to be temperature controlled, let's say for a physical sciences experiment, and if they don't have that temperature control, you lose the phenomenon that you're trying to study. So this late load capability is very important for us, and we really appreciate what Northrop Grumman has done. Popping the pop top of the fairing and inserting our biological cargoes. They've added a life support system within the Cygnus. It's actually an extra locker in there, so it's controlling oxygen and humidity and carbon dioxide. There's also a data system that'll downlink data, so we can, on the ground, our control centers and our scientists can make sure that the data, the samples are really being taken well care of and they're all in good shape for the arrival at the station. The station itself is a multidisciplinary lab in space. A lot of labs on the ground on the Earth will focus on one discipline of science, and a lot of them focus very narrowly on a sub-discipline. Station is multidisciplinary, it's diverse, it's leading edge. We're a cutting-edge laboratory in space. We do the breadth of research that we do falls under biology, biotechnology, Earth and space science, human research, physical sciences, technology and development and demonstration, and global education. Over the course of history, we've had something around 2,600 different investigations performed and still ongoing on station. Normally, we could tell you over the course of 6 months roughly how many investigations we've got, but we're really getting good enough at our processing that we have things coming through the system and they will be assigned in the next couple of months and launched in the next couple of months. It's too early to say what those numbers are going to be. But typically, it's about 300 or so investigations going on at any one time. Cygnus is contributing to the success of at least 40 investigations. About 35-ish are being brought up by Cygnus, and another 5 to 10 or so are supporting investigations already ongoing on ISS. If you weren't with us earlier this afternoon, some of the scientists in the briefings that you missed, I'll give you some of the highlights from this mission. And these scientists and experts are still around here, so you can catch them after the briefing and ask some more questions of them. There's the Astra B facility, which is going to be 3 about bread box size autonomous free-flying robots that will fly in formation. It's testing technology. It also becomes a facility for other experiments to use them, with the goal eventually of helping offload the crew members from doing kind of some of the mundane tasks, as well as free flight and giving the ground control team a little more insight into what's going on. Another experiment is space fibers, where we are manufacturing Z-band network fibers on the station. You can do them on the ground, but in space and microgravity, they come out much more pure. And it's actually a really good potential commercial market. It's got high payback for the low launch and return mass, so we're excited about that. A bioanalyzer from the Canadian Space Agency will be able to analyze blood and other samples on board the station, so we don't have to bring those samples back home. We've got a rodent research mission launching, which is studying the body's response to a tetanus anti-vaccine or a vaccine. That is one of the primary users of this late load capability. We're very appreciative of that. The Virginia Space ThinSat Consortium and the Satellite Consortium folks are here. And a couple of folks who didn't get to talk, but I know they're here. Bionutrients, which is studying using algae to purify water as well as grow food for future use. And the Robotic External Leak Locator, which was managed out here at Goddard Space Flight Center. It was actually a previous technology demonstration used on ISS, and it worked so well that it's now become an established system. There's a lot of work, as I said, going on station, and Joel mentioned the Soyuz crew that just arrived a little bit ago, brought us to 6 crew members total, brought us to 4 USOS or U.S. operating segment crew members, which is great for us in the research world because that 4th crew member essentially doubles the amount of crew time that we have to do all this science that's coming through the system. So we are doing pretty well keeping up with that demand, but if you're a scientist out there, please know that we've got opportunities for you. It's a great time to do your station or your science on station. Other things going on in the station program. Our program science office and our multilateral partnership, the international partners, just finished a new document called the Benefits for Humanity 3rd edition. This is the 3rd in a series. The last one was about 3 or 4 years ago. It's a series of about 100, 130 stories about the research that we've done on station and how that benefits all of us on Earth. This being the 3rd edition, we expanded the envelope a little bit and we explored the economic value of some of these experiments in space. There's a lot of investment that goes into the experiments and the research. How is that paying us back? And we took a couple of tacks on that. For example, the CubeSat market, which really was just invented 20 years ago, has started ramping up in the last 10 years. You can look at the market value of a company that's involved in that and say that business has been developed by the CubeSat market being deployed and developed from the International Space Station. Another area is looking at healthcare and pharmaceuticals. If you've got a drug or a technique that was developed using research on station and it's extending people's lives or reducing the amount of caregiving that they have, that feeds back into the economy as well. They can work longer, the caregivers can go back to regular kind of jobs. So the other new thing that we did in there is the effect on the scientific community, the science value of the research that we're doing. Not just the individual results, but how is that playing around the world between and among science disciplines? For example, I like to think of biophysics. In biotechnology, we're trying to figure out down at the molecular level what's going on in these living organisms. If we want to analyze blood or a sample in space, now you're getting into small tubes. Who but the physicists who understand that flow and can help optimize that? So biophysics is an emergence in the science field. There are 5 other sections in the book. As I said, these stories are really easy to comprehend for those of us laymen on the ground. You can find more information at www.nasa.gov/station-benefits. And the other major thing going on in the science world, you all remember that we did a 1-year mission that concluded about 3 years ago now. Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko spent 11 months on station. You probably know Scott has a twin brother named Mark. They were both astronauts, both are retired now. And it was a great coincidence, and we made the best use of it. So our human research program designed a series of experiments to follow Scott and Mark through the course, not only of the time Scott was on station, but the 6 months prior, set a baseline for Scott and Mark, take a lot of data during that 11 months, see how Scott's data diverged, if at all, from Mark, and then follow him again for 6 or 8 months after Scott got back. And there are really some unique and remarkable findings. We have to preface this by saying Scott is one subject, and so you can't draw a lot of conclusions about how Scott and Mark diverged. But some great things are most of the things that changed while Scott was in flight came back to within the pre-flight readings fairly soon within that 6 months after Scott returned. Another area that we're glad worked well is the immune response. Scott, and both Mark and Scott, got a vaccine, a flu vaccine a year before he flew. Scott gave himself the flu shot in orbit. Mark did the same thing on the ground, and then they each got him again after they landed. And the body's immune system for both of them reacted as we would expect and reacted as we want it to for that vaccine. And another great benefit of all this, of the the suite of investigations is just learning how to analyze the data. There was so much genetic analysis and comparing what changed from Scott's pre-flight to in-flight and what diverged from Mark, that we now have an idea of what is affected by spaceflight, and it helps us focus in future spaceflight studies what is going to change and what should we pay most attention to. You can find more about the TWINS study on www.nasa.gov/twins-study. You can find the paper there, and you can find layman's summaries of all that science. So to wrap it up, we're very thankful for the Cygnus mission and all the support here. I'll finish it up with saying go Cygnus, go Antares, and go science. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for all those wonderful summaries, gentlemen. We will now take questions. We'll start here in the room, and then we'll go to social media for questions using the hashtag AskNASA, and then we'll take any questions we get on the phone line. So please wait for a microphone to come to you, announce your name and your organization and to whom you're directing your question. I see a question here. There's a couple in the room, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Pat from RocketLaunch.live. For Cygnus, you all had demonstrated the ability to boost ISS's orbit. I think it was OA9. Is that planned to be done in this mission or future missions? If not,
yeah, so we're not planning it for this mission. That was the OA9 mission. That experiment, I think, went very well. Hopefully, we'll be able to demonstrate that in the future. But this mission, once we fly away, then we're going to do the other extended duration demonstration.
Okay, great. There's a question back here.
Hi, Chelsea, space.com. I'm curious about both visibility and audience. How many people do you expect to attend the launch? And then also, to add to that, how visible do you think it will be in the nearby area, and where do you think that visibility will stretch?
Sure, I can address part of that, at least, maybe all of it. So we do expect record numbers at Wallops Flight Facility for this launch. I think partly because of the attention. I mean, the students that are participating in the mission, there's a couple hundred of those, and faculty members associated with these small sats, but also the time of day makes it easier to get up. So that's certainly something, and so we do expect to see record crowds, and again, that's why Kurt and others recommend everybody be safe and don't go anywhere you're not supposed to. In terms of the how far you can see it, the Wallops website publishes plots in a Google Earth type map format where you can see with visibility plots put on them, so you can see it. But I know out in Central Virginia, I talk to people regularly that hundreds of miles away can see it. People in New York City, so. Those are on Wallops webpage.
And nasa.gov/Northrop Grumman. We have a visibility viewing map there as well. We have a question up in front. Ken?
Hi, thank you. Ken Kramer, Space Up Close. For, I think, Frank and Kurt, and all of you, congratulations. Good luck, first of all. Can you talk a little bit more about the late load? How long will that take operationally wise to lower it, to load the cargo, and then to raise and confirm that everything's okay with the rocket? And I'd also like to ask about the Cygnus. It's going to be extended duration. You're going to be, besides the CubeSats, you're going to be running any experiments done to 3 months and then during the even longer period beyond that? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll be lowering the vehicle here shortly. We will take the nose cap off, and I think we've allocated 7 hours for what we call the final load. There's initial, late, and final. So the final is the one we're going to do at the pad. We've got 7 hours allocated in the schedule for the Cygnus and Antares team to do that load. Cygnus will then close the hatch. Antares will then put the nose cap back on and maneuver the clean room out of the way. And I think that time's out around early morning, 6, 7 a.m. We'll be going back vertical at that point and get ready for the countdown start, which I mentioned was 11:46 a.m. I'm sorry, one more thing is that we've made a bunch of enhancements at the pad in the way we connect our commodity lines to the pad, where we can leave most of them connected when we go from vertical to horizontal, and back again. The only thing we have to reattach is the liquid oxygen loading line. And so we'll be doing that tomorrow morning and verifying that that's leak tight. That's the one thing we have to reconnect. But so that's some of the improvements we've made to enable this 24-hour late load, final cargo load. Right?
Okay. And to your second question, Ken, so typically when Cygnus flies, we use the thrusters on the spacecraft to control both the attitude and orientation of the spacecraft. And that fuel usage eventually causes us to run out of fuel, and that's typically the life-limiting commodity. What we're doing on this mission is we're installing something called the control moment gyro, which CMGs is the acronym for that. And that is a piece of equipment that actually will do the orientation and attitude control of the vehicle for it. We don't have to use the thrusters for that. So we save all that fuel, and we can apply that saved fuel to just orbit maintenance and keeping the vehicle at the proper altitude. And that's really what allows us to fly this extended duration. So part of that experiment, it's multifold. One, we want to demonstrate our ability to fly CMGs and an alternate attitude control system for Cygnus, which we can implement on future missions. Second, we want to demonstrate the avionics capability of running for long periods of time in orbit. And of course, we've been able to run run those avionics for several months, 3+ months on previous missions. This will go an extended period of time, even double that or so. Third, we want to really demonstrate the really pristine microgravity environment that Cygnus will provide to whoever would like to use it in the future, either to host scientific payloads, to host technology demonstrations, sensors or new technologies for deep space missions. And we also might have the ability in the future of flying away from the ISS with experiments loaded from the ISS, and then eventually go back to the ISS and deliver those experiments. And then, as I mentioned in my remarks, to do that, we know that if we're going to fly a mission for a long period of time, let's say a year, it's very likely that there'll be a cargo mission during that time frame. So the other thing we'll demonstrate once the NG-12 mission is launched is that we can fly 2 Cygnus vehicles in orbit at the same time with using our Mission Control Center both in Dulles and in Houston. So it's really has a lot of really a dense experiment in demonstration that we're performing. All along that time, we have asked our team to come forward with ideas of other experiments they'd like to do on the vehicle, which is something we typically do after we leave the ISS, just to test out the vehicle, other capabilities. And so I'm sure over the months that we'll be in orbit, some of those ideas will come forward, and we'll put those into play.
Okay, so that's all engineering experiments. I'm wondering about science experiments also during the extended mission. Are there any of those?
So during this demonstration, we won't have any scientific experiments on board. That's it. We're doing the demonstration on this mission to prove that for future missions, we will be able to carry those scientific experiments.
Great. Thank you. We will now go to a few social media questions, and then we have a question on the phone bridge after that. Chelsea?
So I have a question from Twitter. What is the most challenging part of this mission, in your opinion? To anybody.
I'll help. Well, let me do that one. We've got the NG-11 mission here launching tomorrow. We also, Station has a SpaceX 17 CRS mission launching in about 8 days after that. So we will have 2 cargo vehicles, 2 science-heavy vehicles berthed to the station at the same time. It's good that we've got 4 crew, but there's so much science going on that we have a couple of weeks coming ahead of us where we can't even do all the science that's in the plan, let alone all the other normal stuff that's in the plan.
Thank you. And now we have a question from Facebook, unless you wanted to add anything. Okay. So when we're talking about the Antares rocket and you say we are a go for launch, are those conditions different than saying we are a go for launch for a mission with a crew on board?
Well, I guess that's a good question. I think, I guess they're speaking of a rocket that is rated to carry humans. My understanding is I'm no expert, having only worked on expendable launch vehicles carrying cargo and satellites to orbit. My understanding is there needs to be a higher level of redundancy on the avionics, navigation, and the actuation system needs to be redundant as well. So I think those are the main features that need to be at a higher level of reliability than we currently specify for our vehicle. we try to strike a balance between all those things and cost, and so that results in the vehicle we have, which we are very confident in. But I think it would be another increment to be carrying humans on board the rocket.
There's different constraints, different requirements. You have to have the abort modes. What happens if you have a problem during ascent, so you want to have the abort mode. So it's just it's a different vehicle versus crew versus cargo.
Thank you all. We have a question on the phone. Jeff Faust.
Hi, this is Jeff Faust of Space News. A couple quick questions. For Frank, do you have a targeted duration for this extended Cygnus mission once it departs? I've sounds like several months, but I didn't hear a specific number. And then for Joel, how did the schedule work out so that you had 2 cargo missions flying effectively back-to-back to the space station? Was that deliberate or just the way the overall station schedule worked out? Thanks.
So I think to the first question, one of the main goals of this demonstration is to have 2 Cygnus vehicles in orbit at the same time. So as a minimum, we'd like, assuming we're successful, we'd like to have NG-11 on orbit when NG-12 launches and we operate that vehicle. So assuming that's in the fall time frame, we're thinking something on the order of 6 to 7 months as a minimum mission duration. Once we achieve that goal, if we've achieved all the other goals, then we'll regroup and determine how much longer we might want to fly the vehicle. So, minimum 6 or 7 months and possibly a little bit longer.
Let's see, as far as planning, do we plan missions a week apart? Generally, we don't do that. Our plan is to fly when the customers are ready. And so what we look at is the manifest of when people think they'll be ready to fly. We look at the vehicles that are available at that time, and then we schedule accordingly.
Great, thank you. We have another question in the room.
Thank you. Sean Costello, Spaceflight Insider. A question for Frank. Can you expand, please, on the naming of this Cygnus, the importance of, and the history that you're bringing forward into everyone's mind?
Well, as we went through the process of selecting the name for this mission, we recognize it's the 50th anniversary of the moon landing on Apollo. And as we talked through that, what we kind of gravitated to was thinking about the folks who have sacrificed so much to make that happen. And we zeroed in pretty quickly that it's really the folks that made the ultimate sacrifice that we wanted to focus on, and that turned out to be Gus Grissom and Ed White and Roger Chaffee. And then when we talked about who amongst those 3 we would choose, we selected Lieutenant Commander Chaffee because of the fact that he just hadn't made it to space yet, whereas Gus Grissom and Ed White had. And so we thought bringing him into space with Cygnus as his namesake was something that we could do. It was about as special as we could come up with. So that's really the way it came about.
Thank you. Great, next question.
Hi, my name's Taylor Michael from Goddard Space Flight Center. One number I've heard repeated a lot over the last decade or so has been that for every $1 that you put into NASA, you get about $10 back. I think you were talking earlier about the return on investment and how it's questioned. Can you speak to that more? Because I think that generally outside of this room, most people aren't really paying attention, and those who are don't know very much. So it'd be really nice to hear some other responses on the return on investment and how it really benefits us. But even in a simple, $1 gets us $6 back kind of way, something simple like that. Thanks.
I'll take a run at it. So as far as dollar numbers, I can't give you any dollar numbers, but we can probably get that afterwards. What I will tell you is we are doing things on board the International Space Station that benefits people here on Earth. One of the things that I like to talk about a lot is the Canadian arm we have on orbit. And so the technology that is used on the Canadian arm is used today in order to operate on brain tumors that in previous times could not be operated on. And so where I see the return of investment is you see there's hundreds of examples of that. The fuel I talked about, the fuel burning efficiencies. If we can have bigger satellites that can be more operational because of things we do on orbit on the International Space Station, that's a direct benefit to people here on Earth. the Canadian experiment, again, studying what happens to the mind on orbit and how the mind reacts to microgravity. You could apply that to diseases here on Earth and what you learn on space. And so there's countless examples of that. And to me, that's really the benefit of the International Space Station. And we're going to keep going. We have lots to do in the future, and we're going to keep bringing those benefits back to Earth.
Pete, did you have something to add?
Sure. The Benefits for Humanity document and the attempt we made to try to quantify some of these things, we call them case studies because each case is unique. Each case, as you go through it, is arguable about what assumptions you think are actually direct commercial benefits. So that was part of the challenge, and I would encourage you to go to that website, /station benefits. We have an executive summary, which does explain some of the attempt at economic valuation. We got to start somewhere, so.
And I would say when you invest in space, you get access to the universe. Next question.
Yeah, in reference to the data that you mentioned with the twins, is there any further plans to continue that study? And if so, how would that translate to a benefit to patients or to medicine here on Earth?
We don't have any twin astronauts in the pipeline, so that's an unfortunate thing. Related to that, though, our human research program wants to continue the one-year mission studies, the longer duration studies. So a lot of the things we learned through concocting this twin study and the whole one-year mission program will help us there in the future. It'll be a great thing when we get the commercial vehicles flying and we know what our crew rotations are going to be, then we can start adjusting who's flying when and coming back when. But yes, all this that we're learning, how to make the best use of the technology to analyze the samples and the genetic variations and stuff, that is all going to feed back as well into benefits for people, just healthcare here on the ground. It opens up the door in one sense of, now that we know the genetics for an astronaut who's going to fly and maybe what they're susceptible to, can we tailor some of the care and the responses to what they're going through to the individual genomic makeup?
And a couple more social media questions.
I have one from Twitter. So how late can late loading be on Cygnus? How much time is needed to bring it back up vertical on the launch pad ahead of the launch?
Let's see, I think our plan is we'll start the process at 24 hours before launch, and that process will take several hours before we hand the vehicle back over to Antares to finish putting the pop top back on the fairing and then transition to vertical and get ready for launch. I think as we go through the process in the future multiple times, I think we'll see how those timelines go, but I think it also is probably a function in some cases of what that late load cargo is and how it needs to be handled. So right now the focus is demonstrate, as we did over the last summer with the demonstration and now for real, that we can start at L-24, get that cargo loaded and launch on time. And as we go through missions of doing that, we may be able to see some other efficiencies. So.
And then real fast, we have another one from Twitter. How long will Cygnus be staying with the ISS this time?
I think we're planning to be there the full 3 months now, right?
So right now we're looking at a late July unbirth date.
Late July unbirthing, yeah. So about 3 months. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have another question in the room here.
Thank you. Alex Mankiewicz of the Zog 43 newsletter. This is for Kurt. Should there be a scrub very late in the countdown, and after it's safe to approach the rocket, would you automatically bring up the mobile clean room and configure our Antares into the late load mode, or perhaps there are other considerations?
Yeah, good question. So if we have to scrub the launch for a reason such as weather or boat incursion or something, we have the ability to stay vertical. We would just stay vertical and try again the next day. But a lot of that is dependent on the specific cargo that NASA has loaded on board Cygnus. And so we've been in consultations with them and discussing what our plan would be in that case. And so for this mission, my understanding is we have the ability to just delay one day, stay vertical, and try again the next day. We also have the ability to go down horizontal, but that would be a 2-day turnaround for this vehicle. Starting with NG-12, we'll have more of a capability to go down, refresh, and then launch the next day. but we don't have that for this mission. So that's something we'll be practicing and refining. But if we don't go tomorrow, then we would try for the next day.
Okay, thank you for all your great questions and the great answers. Thank you for joining us here today for our pre-launch news briefing. A reminder that launch is tomorrow at 4:46 p.m. Eastern Time. That's the launch of the Northrop Grumman Antares rocket with the Cygnus spacecraft headed to the International Space Station. NASA television coverage will begin at 4 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. Until then, you can keep up to date online at nasa.gov/Northrop Grumman, and you can always follow life and science aboard the space station at nasa.gov/station. So go Antares, go Cygnus, and go science.